The business world years ago was what I would consider to be a Division II sport. In the US, we rank colleges based on divisions, Division One being the most difficult. So that's the top of the college sports world, but it's still not the pros, right? It's still not the Super Bowl. Well, Division Two is even less than Division One in terms of that. So my point is that you can look good if you're a decent athlete in Division Two, but you put that Division Two athlete in the Super Bowl, where they were a star in Division Two, they are certainly not going to be a star at the Super Bowl. And so business today is the Super Bowl. The environment is hugely complex. The pace is excruciating, and globalization has made it huge. And so the math is such that you're going to have less people who are just capable of being great as leaders.
Welcome to the Live Brave podcast. I'm Margie Worrell. Here you'll learn how to live and lead with more courage in an increasingly anxious world. If you'd love to bring your bravest self to your biggest challenges and the boldest vision for your life, you are in the right place. Let's get started. Hello, welcome back to the Live Brave podcast. It's great to be with you, even though I do have a bit of a head cold. You might be able to hear it in my voice. I have just had a fabulous time traveling around Egypt, cruising up the Nile, seeing the extraordinary sights, just marveling in the engineering genius that created the pyramids that are still standing 4,500 years after they were built. And I just enjoyed everything Egypt. I love traveling in different cultures. I love being in places that are wholly different from where I live. And Egypt delivers that in spades. But it wasn't actually my first time in Egypt. I traveled there in my early 20s when I spent a couple of years backpacking around the world. And the second big trip I did took me from Morocco down through the Sahara into Niger and Nigeria. And then I flew up to Egypt. I traveled around there for 3 weeks, then over to Jordan and then into Israel, where I stayed in the Palestinian refugee camps as a 23-year-old with just a lot of curiosity and a big sense of adventure. And it's funny, it was sort of weird being back in Egypt 30-something years on, this time with my husband who gave me this cold, and 2 of my kids who are older than I was at the time when I was backpacking around on a shoestring budget, staying in the cheapest places I could find, catching public transport. So yeah, we leveled up a little bit on that experience. But St. Augustine said, life is a book and those who don't travel read only one page. And I know that I have a particularly big passion and just love of adventure travel and being intrepid and going places that are a bit off the beaten path. But all of us benefit from leaving the familiarity of where we live most of our lives and going different places. It shifts our perspective. So I loved that trip. And to anyone who's thinking about Egypt, check out the photos. I posted them on my socials. I hope it whets your appetite. Happy to give advice on what to do or not to do. But today, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about greatness. And I just recorded a conversation with Alan Guarino. Alan was a colleague of mine during my time at Korn Ferry. We were both senior partners there. He worked, and he still does work there. He's a vice chair now in the CEO succession practice. And our paths crossed multiple times, me more in the development of and supporting senior executives to scale their impact. Alan, obviously, in the recruitment side, finding the best people to put into these roles. And during our time there, we also had exchanges about what does it take to lead well in an uncertain world. And given that he's just launching his brand new book, The Greatness Code, I said, hey, why don't we do a podcast conversation on this? Share with me your insights. So Alan's insights don't just come from his time at Korn Ferry. He actually graduated from West Point, which is a pretty awesome place to have gone through education. He's also had many experiences over his really incredible career in terms of his leadership, working with other leaders. While he's largely focused in the financial domain, he has worked with people across sectors in large Fortune 50 companies and also with smaller organizations too. So his His insights today come from a lot of data points. And he has sought to codify greatness. What does it take for us to really create great lives? And as Alan says, and I wholeheartedly concur with, we have to decide how it is we want to measure success. It isn't necessarily about climbing a corporate ladder. It's not for everyone to be the CEO of a business, but you get to decide, how do you want to measure success? And our conversation, hopefully, will help you think about, well, what could I be doing more of that would enable me to feel more success, to experience more, and to be someone that makes a bigger impact for others? Because in my mind, success, if it's only about us, it's pretty hollow. It's about the impact we get to make for others using our unique talents. I know I wasn't cut out to be CEO of a large multinational, and you may not be either, or maybe you are. But as you listen to our conversation, I want you to think about, what is it that you could be bringing to the interactions you have every day, to the people you meet, to the work that you do, and where do you sometimes sell yourself a little short? Because so often we do, and we hold back, we play it a little too safe, we put off making decisions. Our fear of getting it wrong keeps us doing the very things that could help make things more right for us, for the teams we work in, for the organizations we're part of. Enjoy my conversation with Alan, and I would love to hear from you. What is it that resonated most? And please always take a moment, rate, review this podcast, share it with others, and subscribe wherever you're listening to this now. And now, on with my conversation with Alan Guarino. Well, Alan, it's great to see you again, and thanks for being on my podcast, and congrats on your new book.
Margie, thanks for having me. Great to see you.
Yeah. So the Greatness Code, I got the advanced copy, which I was grateful for, loved reading through it. And I'm fascinated about what inspired you after your long esteemed career to write a book about how do we codify greatness?
Well, it's a good question. And, I actually, wrote a book many years ago in 2007, and I thought I'd write a book every few years. And then unfortunately, I didn't have anything that was worth 60,000 words until 17 years later. What inspired me, Margie, is a little bit sad, but good things come from difficult things. I really got disappointed with what I thought was the quality of leadership today. And I felt like we had a crisis in leadership. And my firm, we help leaders every day and we help leaders be great. But there are tens of thousands, millions of leaders out there, and they have a big impact on people's lives. And so I thought, well, if we can't make every leader great, maybe I can pass on some wisdom to people so that regardless of the environment they're in, they'll know the formula for success and they can apply that formula. And if they're in a great environment, it's even better. But even if they're not, I wanted to give them something to power through.
Yeah, you and I have both worked with many leaders across many different sectors. And I think the challenges for leaders today are more complex than perhaps they were when you and I started our careers, because we're living in obviously an incredibly accelerated environment. There's a whole lot of issues they have to navigate that leaders didn't have to navigate, in terms of social issues. We've got, the online social media. There's so many different things they're navigating. I'm guessing that the context of leadership today has factored into your thinking and what is required for leaders to really be impactful and to navigate, the many different challenges they face. So share with me your thoughts in terms of how the context for leadership has changed today.
So, Margaret, when we worked together, you always blew me away, and you just did it again. I mean, spot on. The reason is because it's very difficult to be a great leader today. And I use this analogy of sports, and I say that because of pace, complexity, and globalization that has evolved over the last decade or more, the business world years ago was what I would consider to be a Division II sport. In the U.S., we rank colleges based on divisions, Division I being the most difficult. So that's the top of the college sports world, but it's still not the pros, right? It's still not the Super Bowl. Well, Division II is even less than Division I in terms of that. So my point is that you can look good if you're a decent athlete in Division Two. But you put that Division Two athlete in the Super Bowl, where they were a star in Division Two, they are certainly not going to be a star at the Super Bowl. And so business today is the Super Bowl. The environment is hugely complex. The pace is excruciating, and globalization has made it huge. And so the math is such that you're going to have less people who are just capable of being great as leaders. I had lunch today with someone who we were talking about, and I said, listen, these aren't people who intend to be like unkind and non-motivating. Maybe a small percentage sadly are, but it's a small percentage. That said, they still don't motivate, they still don't inspire, they still don't lead because they don't have the aptitude for this tough playing field. So there's a reason for it. You nailed it when you asked the question. It doesn't change the situation though. People go home unhappy, demoralized, unmotivated, looking to leave their company or organization. That all becomes from the leadership environment and the culture.
We're going to take a short break now so that I can let you know about the retreat that I will be leading in February 2026 with the Modern Elder Academy. I have run many retreats over the years, but I haven't run them in recent years. So this is my first program, a deep dive, immersive, transformational few days with a group of like-minded people, largely in their middle years, who are thinking about, what do I want to do in the next chapter of my life, the next season of my life? Where is courage calling? There'll be a link to the retreat in the show notes. And if it doesn't work for you to join me for 4 days just outside Santa Fe, I invite you to check out my brand spanking new LinkedIn learning course. It is a program that I'm so proud of. It's by far the best, most incredibly produced learning program I have ever done. The team at LinkedIn were extraordinary, and it's obviously very low barrier to entry for you to do that. I am sure that the time you spend doing this course will pay off in big dividends in your career, in your work, in your relationships, leadership, and life. And finally, little plug, The Courage Gap was just given the Gold Titan Award by the Titan Literary Awards, as well as being named as one of the best management books for 2025 by the Globe and Mail. Plus, it won an International Impact Award. So yeah, I don't write books for awards. No author in their right mind would do that. But man, it's pretty affirming when they get that sort of acknowledgement. So if you haven't yet got a copy of The Courage Gap, and you want to make changes this year, you want to pursue challenges, if you sometimes find yourself feeling stuck, stressed, playing it too small, I hope you'll check it out. There'll also be a link in the show notes. Now, back to my conversation with Alan.
Yeah. No, and I often look at this not through a lens of a lack of intelligence. It's not a lack of access to information. There's more at the tips of leaders today than ever before. It is, to me, a lack of developing some of those key character traits of what it takes to lead well. And you've really honed that in this book. You've identified 5 key traits. One of them, of course, is one that I write and speak about a lot, but across the board, obviously, they're all required. You just talk me through, before we dive into them, I know you graduated West Point, you've had many different experiences and a really big focus on servant leadership. But I know you spent time with underprivileged people in Appalachia. Can you share with me a little about that experience and how that shaped and informed how you view leadership, and even, what you poured into this book too?
Sure. What I thought relative to the Appalachian story, and that's a big part of the introduction, as you probably know. Well, certainly you've read the book. The notion around Appalachia was, if you're going to write a book on greatness, let's not assume we all know what greatness is, because that would be pretty obnoxious. And so a lot of people default to greatness being making a lot of money and having power. Okay, fine, but there's a lot more to it. And so what I learned in Appalachia was, and by the way, when I was going there to do work with the Franciscans with my family, recognize it's 10 hours south of Wall Street by car. We're not going around the world here, but it is a world away. And so the point around the Appalachian story in the book is, I'm not going to tell you what greatness is for you. That's not my place. And it's what you need to define for yourself. So everyone has multiple greatness objectives going on in their life at any given time. And career success, if you will, is one of them. Life success is a bigger one. So you may want to be a great parent. You may want to be a great community leader. You may want to be a great executive, or you may want to be a great tradesperson or a great teacher. You determine what your greatness objectives are. And when you know what they are, as you strive for them, and strive is my favorite word, strive and inspire, um, you're going to need to use this formula, which is the 5 key qualities plus social capital, regardless of what the objective is. Now, in Appalachia, they define largely, I don't want to stereotype people, but largely based on faith, community, food, shelter. Those are the key things that make up greatness for them. And that's different than many people are striving in the corporate world for, let's say, money and power.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and obviously, when you're struggling to get by, and I know my own experience, Ellen, having grown up in a relatively underprivileged environment, certainly where I saw what was possible was very limited. My guess is in some of those places, it, yeah, you said Wall Street, maybe only 10-hour drive away, but they can't even imagine what's possible. The, their experience of life is very limited in understanding what they can do. And maybe that's part of what shapes, what they do as well. Can you just walk me through now those 5 traits? Because I'd love to dive into them in a bit more and make them accessible for those who are going to be listening to this podcast and think about, what does this mean for me on my journey with whatever greatness means for me?
Sure. So I use the acronym SCRIP to help people remember. So stamina, courage. You know anything about that? um, Resilience, persistence, and passion. That's SCRIP. And what I stress is that these are muscles, and we're all born with the capacity for each. Some naturally stronger than others, but the fact is we can build these muscles. So early career, it's about recognizing that part of what you need to do is build these muscles. And you do that through various experiences, and some painful, but pain is good when you want to grow and build capability and character. The old no pain, no gain, I guess, saying. Then mid-career and late career, you're using them and continuing to develop them and deploying them. And so I felt like nobody wanted to hear 60,000 words from me. So the book has many, many personalities in it, and I tell their stories. And by telling their stories, you learn about these muscles and how they actually are real, and they actually have been the formula behind incredible success for people. And by the way, in this book, we talk about James Gorman, the CEO of Morgan Stanley, right? But we also talk about Dean Dillon, who's the #1 songwriter in the history of Nashville. Very different people, very different careers, both achieved incredibly. Dean's story, embodies early career, all of the key elements of script. Dean came to Nashville at 17, hitchhiked, no money, grew up in a very tough family environment, knocked on doors at Nashville, got rejected time after time after time, slept in a coal bin underneath a building on Music Row in Nashville in 1975. I'm not talking 1920 here. And he was then told that he'd have 7 years before he was putting anything out that people would maybe want to buy as a songwriter. That was a perfect moment for him to say, I think I need to do something else. But he didn't. He persevered. He had stamina. He had courage. He had resilience. He had persistence. He had passion. And he said 7 years to the day that he was told that he'd have 7 years before he put out anything worthwhile if he did it all. He heard his first song played on the radio when he was driving his truck on the freeway. And he said he pulled over and he cried.
Yeah, that's a compelling story. I think just kind of if I want to break these down a little bit, stamina. When I think of stamina, it's that staying power, the ability to just keep moving forward even when you might say I'm done. But I'm curious on that, particularly the stamina one. That requires having a really strong ethic around work as well. And I know you address the generational differences in your book. I'm curious here, in terms of stamina and staying power, what have you seen any shift over the course of your career, say with Gen Zs today, and that grittiness to just work hard and put in hours and keep going and keep going? What's your observation on that?
I don't want to generalize because, first of all, while I get to see a lot of people as you do, we still don't see enough people to really label a generation of people, especially around the world, right? But I do put in the book a lot of the research based generalizations around each group: Gen Z, millennials, um, boomers. And I think one would say that um, I'd like to say that they have the same stamina as boomers, right? You have to compare if you're going to talk about people in terms of these qualities and you want to evaluate how they stack up, you have to compare. That said, I think that they have different agendas than baby boomers had because they have a different playing field than baby boomers had. So I wouldn't say that any of these generations are, let's call it, suboptimal. They all have equal potential, and they may need to do different. They clearly need to do things differently than baby boomers did, and so on.
Yeah. Obviously, there's my experience, particularly with the Gen Zs, I'm a parent of four of them, is they have to have a strong link to purpose in the work they do. It's like it's got to be really meaningful for many of them, not for all. And I agree with you, generalizations aren't fair. But that actually links to that passion piece. Do I have a passion around what I'm doing? You mentioned courage, and yes, it's something I write and speak around a lot. But when it comes to courage, what's that mean for you, and what does that look like in terms of leadership today when it's not just, the known risks. There's a lot of unknown risks. There's a lot that we don't even know what might happen. So it's hard to do the cost benefit analysis when you're not even quite sure what that's going to look like because things are moving so fast. So, what does courage look like for you from a leadership lens, working with the senior execs that you do regularly?
Right. Well, a little cynical here, sadly. I'm quite disappointed in what I consider to be the motivation for top leaders today. I feel like when I was earlier in my career, uh, my clients were all playing to win. And over time, and I don't judge people for this, but I believe that more and more leaders today are actually finding it necessary for whatever reason to play not to lose as opposed to playing to win. It takes a lot more courage to play to win than it does to play not to lose.
You're absolutely right. I wonder if part of that is because it does feel there's so many more unknowns. The uncertainty is ramped up. Whether we call it the acronym VUCA or the acronym Barney, there's a bunch of different acronyms that float around in terms of the environment. But that's my observation too. I see a lot of indecision. People aren't sure exactly what to do, so they kind of push the decisions around and pull, like, well, what do you think? And delay and defer. And I think that mindset play to win. Yes, it's offensive. You're taking action even though you don't know quite where things are going to land. And we look at Gen AI and how that's revolutionizing the workplace. That resilience piece and persistence too. It's obviously being adaptable as well. I think about what are the fears that are at play. And what do you think? What's your observation when you talk to people? What do you think people are feeling most afraid of?
I think it goes to this concept of pace, complexity, and globalization. You nailed it. There are so many unknowns that it's difficult to be as decisive as maybe we were in the past, and that's because things moved more slowly, I think, and they were not as complex. But on the other hand, in those days, CEOs ran companies. Now teams run companies if it's a high performing company. So it's too much for one human being to run a company today. So while CEOs still, for many reasons, get labeled as running the company, I would tell you that their team with them, with their direction and inspiration, run the company. But it's not as easy as one individual really running the business. And that's true at every level.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I that's my observation as well. Speaking of teams, obviously, people early in their career are part of a team. They're learning to collaborate and be a team player. What's your advice for people early in their careers as they kind of look at this wide open field, but also a whole lot of uncertainty and a whole lot of change taking place? What do you think will set those 20 somethings and even, 30 somethings up for the most success in their careers?
Yeah. So that's the other part of the greatness code formula. We have the 5 Qs and we have social capital. SC. So 5Q plus SC equals greatness. That's the code. That's the formula. Social capital is a fancy word for your network. It's the people around you that support you, tell you when you're needing to, maybe change direction, It's critical. And I love Carla Harris's work on this. She's a terrific, hugely successful vice chairman at Morgan Stanley, and she's been talking for years about the fact that while she thought your work spoke for itself when she was a young up and coming professional, she was given very good advice, and it was that while your work does speak for itself, it's not enough. It's the voice of that work is not loud enough. And so you need to have people around you that will promote you, that will say good things about you. And when you're not in the room, and then by the way, when promotions are being handed out, you're typically not in the room. So you need advocates, you need mentors. So I think the advice that they need to understand is going, to Dan Goleman's work around emotional intelligence and EQ. Like it or not, the relationships around you are critical, and you have to build that network of people.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I once heard your network is your net worth, and whether or not that's true or not, those relationships, because you never know when you might call on one or need to. But what are people saying about you when you're not in the room? I think on that front, when it comes to building that social capital, we have to sometimes put ourselves out there. We need to go out, introduce ourselves to people and ask, let people know who we are and what we want. And early in the career, I think sometimes people are a little reticent to do that. They don't want to seem like they're being pushy or needy. We don't want to impose on people. I don't want to make an ask and have them, think I'm being a little bit too forward. What's your experience of younger people? And I've actually noticed a slight gender difference in this between men and women too. But when it comes to building social capital, some people go, well, I'm not sure how to do that. What would you say to someone that wasn't quite sure how to build social capital?
Sure. Well, one is there's about 7,000 words in the book devoted to doing it. So there's plenty of coverage in there. We talk about network, and people immediately that aren't, wired to be gregarious and outgoing kind of draw away from the notion, right? So what my advice is, you know, seek out mentors in a thoughtful way, um, and see if they're going to enjoy and get personal reward themselves from advising you. And you'll find people that will. That's a late career trait. Wanting to help others is something they're seeking as well. And then of course the network by what can you do to help those colleagues around you. And if you're helpful to colleagues, then ultimately you will have a supportive network because you get what you give. So that's really my advice. But they have to be intent on doing it. They have to be thoughtful, and they have to actually make it part of their daily list of tasks, if you will.
Yeah, no,
So
I think that intentionality can go a long, long way. That is obviously great advice for those who are building their careers. And in the book, you talk about coming down the mountain. And I love that you have a whole chapter in there on coming down the mountain. Some may be listening to this going, what do you mean by that? Can you just share a little bit about why you even felt that was really important to put in the book? And what does it mean?
I thought it was super important because I think it's probably an equally meaningful part of your life, and it may be as many as 20 plus years. So it's no small thing. The book talks about early, mid, and peak career, but anyone who's ever climbed anything knows that when you get to the peak, you're not done. Coming down the mountain and ultimately getting back to the base camp and knowing that it's been a journey well done is really the whole trip. And so coming down the mountain was a logical way to say you've peaked in your career. You're going to be leaving your organization. You're going to, quote, retire or whatever you call it. And by the way, it says determining when, if, and how you should retire. And it's not retiring. It's, in my view, it's coming down the mountain and shifting to another life. And it's labeled your second life. And it's a great story about one of the people that I met during the course of the book who had gone on to start a second life guiding people on fishing on the Alba River coming out of Lake Como in Italy. But after being with him for an hour where I was his customer, I learned that he wasn't a career fishing guide. He was a retired software engineer who sold his company to an incredible company in Switzerland, where he had created the ability to create imaging for tumors of the brain, turning them into 3 dimensions so that they could be more effective in how they were treated. But if you had met him in his little fishing boat with his oars, you would have no idea who he was. But that was how he came down the mountain and how he stayed engaged, excited, passionate, and relevant in his in his new life after peaking in his corporate career. So yeah, it's a fun part of the book.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of people. I'm actually running a retreat next month that is about how do people in the middle years of life or at the point where they've reached the peak just even get clarity on what's next. Because a lot of people like are a little terrified of it. They're not quite sure what does that look like. So I think it's fantastic that you've given people that kind of guide to how they do that, because a lot of people aren't sure, and people can do it really well like that, and there's also people who don't do it well, and I think it can create a lot of struggle when it makes that
Yeah.
making that transition out of the full time corporate role. So obviously you work a lot with people in really senior leadership roles, Alan, and you've had extraordinary career at Korn Ferry and prior to that. But to anyone listening here, they may see themselves as a leader. They may see themselves as not a leader in the corporate kind of more business sense. But when it comes to just the core aspects of them living their lives in a little bit better way today, tomorrow, this year than they did in the past, and really cultivating those traits, cultivating the stamina, the courage, the resilience, the persistence, the passion. What are things that people can do to start leading themselves better? How do I, if I've never been particularly persistent, if I've always struggled to know what my passion is if I don't see myself as resilient or brave, etc., what is it that people can do to just strengthen those character traits within themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I can tell you, I'm never going to be a neurosurgeon. I am never going to be a professional footballer. Um, there's a lot of things I'm never going to be. And so we all have to realize that we're born with certain capabilities, and our mission in life is to optimize those capabilities. So what I would say to folks is, number one, do what you do for you. Measure yourself against what you think you should achieve, and don't get caught up in the rabbit hole of comparing yourself to other people and how they, in your view, have done. Because quite frankly, there's no universal standard for measuring that. There are many, many people who are labeled successful, who people admire from a business perspective. We all know, sadly, they may look great from a business perspective, but are they tremendous parents? Are they tremendous friends? Are they tremendous partners? um, there's a lot of dimensions to life to measure yourself if you're going to measure against external standards. But if you measure yourself against what you're setting out to do, and you're honest about your own weaknesses and shortcomings and areas where you need to grow, then you'll get to become, as we said in the Army when I was early in my career, to be the best you can be, which is really all you should ask yourself to try to accomplish, right?
Yeah, I think your point there is one that people need to hear, and they need to hear again, is to define how you want to measure success and be very intentional in that. Don't let the world define that for you. Don't give away power to others to say this is the metric of success. You get to define that. And I think it was Jacqueline Kennedy or Narcissus, obviously many decades ago, said, if you become a billionaire, I mean, she married a narcissist, but you haven't done a good job raising your kids, you got to question what the success looks like. And I think to that point, we do need to be so careful not to get swept up into, these very externally measured ideas of success, and to kind of go, what is the quality of my relationships with my partner, with my children? How much do I, really let external metrics define my own identity, which it's
Absolutely.
easy to do in the world that we live in.
Absolutely. There's a section in the book that
Alan,
says,
just,
not going to be CEO. Good for you. And then it talks about
yeah.
when you have that realization, what else are you going to do? And there's a lot of things you
Yeah.
can do.
Well, that actually makes me think of, I remember during my time at Korn Ferry working in the CEO Institute there, and working with people who were being kind of groomed and developed for these very senior executive roles, and talking to them about what success meant for them, what gave them a sense of purpose, what lit them up, what drove them. And sometimes people were very enamored and taken with the idea of being a CEO. It sounded good. Just the idea that they would be CEO, and obviously some of these companies were Fortune 50 companies, a lot of status that goes with that. a lot of perks too, obviously, a nice salary. But when you really broke it down, for some it was like, I don't think I want all of that. Actually, that the idea of it sounded great, but actually the reality of it, when they got really peeled back away some of those external measures, it was less enticing than if they were just being driven by, well, gee, this will show my dad I really am going to amount to something. This will let those people know. And sometimes driven more by insecurity than by really deep values. So I think there's a lot of gold when we dig in within ourselves and go, how is it that I really want to define success?
No question about it. No question about it.
So just finishing up, you talked about knowing that you're not invincible in the book. And so I'm curious about, why you feel that was so important to have people know that they're not invincible.
Sure. Because I've seen too many people actually defeat themselves. And so I think it's very important to realize that you can only go so far. You are not going to be everybody's cup of tea in terms of trying to build that network and relationships. So the sooner you realize that you and that person are just never going to get on, then fine, put that energy somewhere else. You're not invincible, and in that regard. The other is, around what is possible. And if you have aspirations that are too high, you will be defeated by yourself, and you'll realize you're not invincible. And for many people, the realization of that they're not invincible, if they're not prepared to know that they aren't, is very, very destabilizing. So I think being measured, having realistic aspirations, not being, let's call it, a little delusional about what your capabilities are, is all healthy and will let you get way farther than you probably will get if you lack that self-awareness. Because that's really what not being invincible is all about. It's about having the self-awareness to know what your capabilities are and optimizing them and challenging yourself to get as far as you possibly can, which may not be as far as other people.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And I think sometimes it can be a little humbling as people go along. They'd like to think that they could be in a certain place, and maybe that's actually their strengths aren't necessarily where they might be attached to them being. Alan, is you think about the work you're doing today, and as you share with this book and you get out there and talk about it a lot, what would be your wildest aspiration for the way that your work, your career, and this book impacted people when you eventually reach the peak of your mountaintop and look back?
Yeah. Well, yeah, Margie, in wrapping up, it's a wonderful question. And I'll tell you, there was a dear friend of mine who was quite young. He was a very deeply adored school teacher in my community, and in his late 40s passed away suddenly, literally out of the blue. And I remember they closed school because there was no way people weren't going to be able to attend, and they did it for a day so that people could get their head around it. At his funeral, you couldn't get in. There were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who had gone back 20 years when he was an early teacher. And I said, wow, that would never happen at my funeral. So I think what I'd like is for people that are in tough environments to get stronger and better because of what they read in the book about the formula. And I think people that are in good environments will even go farther because of what they've learned from the book. And that's how I would wrap it up.
Yeah, well, it makes me think of the words of Maya Angelou, who said, people won't always remember what you said or what you did, but they'll always remember about how you made them feel.
Absolutely. Did for them.
Yeah, and Alan, I know you've experienced this yourself, working with great leaders and working with not so great leaders or people that are yet to become great. Is that, when we're thinking about how am I making other people feel, how do I show up for others on the sunny days, but also on the rainy days, that ultimately can be such a defining feature of our lives and what true greatness is actually all about, right?
You nailed it. Well, Margie, thank you so much for me. This is a great service and show that you make happen for the marketplace, and you change people's lives from this. So I can't thank you enough. The people that listen learn.
Well, thank you. And again, to everybody, the Greatness Code, I'll be sharing a link in the show notes. And congratulations again, Alan, and all the very best to you as you move forward and get this book out into the world.
Margie, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay, I'll stop that there. Thank